Today's Mercedes interview of the day brought to you by Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz has an SUV for you, whether it's the stylish GLC, the compact GLA, the three-row GLS, or the GLE and GLC plug-in hybrids. Visit MBUSA.com for special offers. He's Peter King, NFL analyst for SiriusXM, the Let's Go podcast with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Max Crosby, and Jim Gray, and covered the NFL for more than 4 decades. Pete, good to see you. As soon as I see Pete, he says, hey, 45 years today. And I go, 45? And he goes, Chris Berman's 45th?
Berman, 45-year anniversary. I just saw it on social media on the way up here today.
Dang.
Yeah, 45 years.
45 years at the mothership. Yeah.
So that must mean 1979.
He was there, when it started.
1979.
Yeah, him and Bob Lee and Tom Mees.
Yeah.
And I think they had a trailer. There was no building. Yeah. I mean, the fact, everybody wanted to work at ESPN when it became cool.
Yeah.
But those who were the pioneers who started a place when it wasn't cool, nobody knew if it would last. They thought it might be a local Connecticut sports channel.
Yeah.
But for Bob and Chris and the late Tom Mees to take a chance with something like that, and that's why I've said all along, build a statue there of those three, name a building after them. I mean, remember them because people are going to forget them, and I don't want them to, because without them, I'm not here. I don't have this job, and I forever indebted that they were doing it when they didn't even know who was watching. So happy anniversary to Chris Berman. All right, what do you miss most? How are you when you watch a football game? Watching it differently?
I mean, I watch the Sunday night game, the first half, with a glass of wine in my hand and having just finished pizza. No, I watch it for total entertainment now, for yucks, for fun. And I used to watch it, like if I had an idea that I was going to write a column about Joe Burrow, I would have the Bengals game on, and I would watch every moment of Joe Burrow. And now I just watch the game. I do watch it a little bit differently. I just watch it for fun. I put on Red Zone. Scott Hansen is my guru. And for 6 or 7 hours, that's what I do. The difference in my life now, Dan, is that except for the first week where I watched all of the Sunday night game, I am in bed no later than halftime. And 1 week I was in bed about 8:45 on Sunday night because that was the one thing about my life that I really didn't like. When you're a kid, you can stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning one day, and then so it's a rough next day, but then you're fine the day after. But you do that when you're 66, 67 years old, and your life sucks until Wednesday. And so I just didn't want to do that anymore.
But how much did your brother's health, like you start to have mortality, when somebody around you passes away?
I mean, all my father and my 2 brothers were all dead before the age of 65. And, I'm 67 now, and I'm not going to be dead anytime soon. Well, shoot, that's a dumb thing to say. But I don't, I'm trying to take care of myself and all that stuff. But my whole point is, it's harder to do that when you're always tired and when you're beat up, even if you're working out. And I was working out 3-4 days a week, but after a while, it just really starts to get to you.
Give me the team, the story that you would love to do a deep dive on this year, right now.
I would really love to do Dan Quinn, the Commanders. I really wish they'd just be Washington football team.
I love that.
That was the greatest thing. Football team. That would really be fun. I've never met Jaden Daniels. I don't know much about him, but wow, is he impressive. But the other team I would love to be around a lot is Kansas City. Because, look, if Kansas City somehow finds a way this year, they're the Beatles. They're going to be Mahomes as John Lennon. Andy Reid is a portly Paul McCartney. And, they are going to be the biggest thing in sports because obviously in the Super Bowl era, and not since Green Bay 60 years ago, where somebody win 3 titles in a row. And so that, to me, I'm totally fascinated. And, Dan, I think we're going to look back on this era of football and we're going to say, okay, the first 20 years of this century were owned by Brady. The next 20 years are going to be owned by Mahomes. And one of the biggest reasons is not just talent and all that stuff, but he has the will. And I tell this story. Last year in Frankfurt, when I was covering the game for NBC, they played Miami, and they're playing crappy on offense. And after the game, I interviewed Mahomes on the field for NBC, and I said, man, your offense, you won, but your offense is in trouble. And he goes, oh, we're going to straighten it out. Don't worry, we're going to be okay. And afterwards, I went into the locker room, and I kind of gave him a little fist bump, said, thank you. You didn't have to do that, and I appreciate you doing it. He said, hey, no problem. He says, Peter, I want to tell you, we're going to get this offense straightened out. I guarantee it. I promise you. And he has the will that a lot of people don't have, but that Tom Brady did have.
Speaking of Brady, you're the newest member of the Let's Go podcast. You got Brady, Belichick, Max Crosby, Jim Gray. How do you get in a word edgewise?
Well, it's all in different segments. So, like, I do one segment with Jim Gray on kind of happenings of the league. And, the other day we talked a lot about Derrick Henry. And then me and Jim will interview Max Crosby every week. And then Belichick does his own thing with Jim. And Brady's not on every week. He's on, I don't know how often he'll be on, but he's not on every week because he's got his other life now. But, I mean, it's kind of fun just to have 14 minutes. At NBC, you've got a minute 40. And now you got 14 minutes. That's kind of fun. Just to be able to talk, What
do you make of Belichick, the media star?
Well, I always knew he'd be good at this for a very simple reason. A long time ago in the 80s, I covered the Giants, and Belichick was defensive coordinator. And he wasn't Johnny Carson, but he was incredibly insightful and enlightening. And look, he wanted a head coaching job, so he was going to be friendly, and not friendly, but, he was going to cooperate with the writers. And in those days, the writers were everything. And so Belichick was great. And he's got it in him to be clever, to be a little bit funny, and to be really, really smart, obviously, about football. So I had no doubt he'd be good. If Bill wants to be good at something, he's going to be good at something. Now we just have to wait. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind or anybody's. I would assume that somebody's going to give him a shot next year. But Dan, I would just say this about next year with Bill Belichick. I want to see how accepting he is to some new stuff in football, to analytics, to stuff that I think he's always sort of viewed himself as the smartest guy in the room, even though he wouldn't say that. But he has viewed himself that way. And I think there's more information than ever. And I think he's got to start taking advantage of that information.
Is he going to be a GM, too? Is he going to have, a dual title?
I don't think he should be, because I'm not saying nobody in his right mind would allow Bill to pick all the groceries, but I do think that he's going to have a good deal of say. But look, had he gone to Atlanta, Arthur Blank was not going to neuter or fire Terry Fontenot, the GM. And so Bill was going to have to accept that. And I think, and quite honestly, Dan, he should accept it. He should look at his weakness over the last 6 or 8 years that he did the Patriots. He was a weak evaluator and collector of talent. There's no other way to put it.
We're talking to Peter King. He's the newest member of the Let's Go podcast. It's available every Monday at 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific on Sirius XM. Mad Dog Radio, that's channel 82. Why is Jerry Jones in the Hall of Fame before Robert Kraft?
Well, first of all, Robert Kraft, I firmly believe, will get in the Hall of Fame. I think Jerry Jones got in the Hall of Fame for two reasons. Number one, 3 Super Bowls. Number two, the business model. Jerry Jones gets in as a, quote, contributor, end quote. And I don't know anybody who, if you say a guy has won 3 Super Bowls, now whatever year he got in, it was about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was. But at the time, he had 3 Super Bowls, and he changed the way the NFL did a lot of its business. And he made the league a lot of money, and he made the league different. So that's why. Now, if you want to argue that Robert Kraft, first of all, I think, and I'd have to look up the year that Jerry got in, Robert Kraft probably had either 3 or 4 by the time Jerry got in. And look, I've said this about Kraft many times, and now I'm not a voter on the committee anymore. I resigned a couple of months ago, but I am going to be a consultant to the committee. And I have said this for a long time, that the reason that Robert Kraft will get in, and I'm not one of those that said, well, of course he should be in. He probably should be in by now, but he's going to get in. And the biggest reason is because in the year 2000, right as the millennium began, Robert Kraft did something that nobody wanted him to do. He hired Bill Belichick. Everybody thought, oh, my God, this antisocial loser from Cleveland, got blown out in Cleveland. Why would you give him another team? What are you doing? And he went against everybody. And of all the things he's done in the NFL, and he's done a lot business-wise, collective bargaining-wise, and all that stuff, the fact that he went against the grain and hired Belichick, because just remember, Bill Belichick, Scott Pioli, they're the guys who picked the players in New England very early on. There's no reason to think that Dom Capers and whoever would be on the personnel side. There's no reason to think they would have picked Tom Brady with the 199th pick in that year in their first draft. It's almost chancy anyway. But the fact is, he brings in somebody who's got the presence of mind somehow, some way to pick Tom Brady, and they live happily ever after for 2 decades and win 6 Super Bowls.
Is Russell Wilson playing his way out of the Hall of Fame?
I don't know. There's going to be so many quarterbacks from this era who have a good argument for the Hall of Fame. So many. And I don't know. I'm always hesitant. The one guy, though, Dan, I'm hesitant on Russell Wilson. I would like to see him do a little bit more somewhere outside of the cocoon of Seattle, and he hasn't yet, but let's see. The one guy who this year in Detroit on that Sunday night and then against San Francisco, I said to myself, Matthew Stafford, I'm not saying it's an absolute no doubt. Matthew Stafford absolutely has my vote. I think he's this generation's Dan Fouts. And plus, he's got a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Dan Fouts didn't have one. I just think that Matthew Stafford and what he's done with a team that many times has been down and out because of injuries, he just keeps them in every single game. And I think Matthew Stafford's special.
And what I found interesting is these younger quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, C.J. Stroud, and they were gushing over Matthew Stafford.
Yeah.
Gushing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they grew up on him and they're watching. Now, granted, he wasn't on the big stage, really, other than with the Rams, but they're seeing him and seeing what it's like to be a quarterback, to be able to do what he's doing. And I found that amazing, because if you're a young quarterback, you're probably saying, maybe it's Tom Brady, maybe it's Patrick Mahomes, somebody. They're watching Matthew Stafford when he was in Detroit.
Yeah.
And gushing over him.
Yeah. And look, everybody's going to say, if you say, Matthew Stafford, the negative people for the Hall of Fame. To me, Matthew Stafford lifted that franchise for so many years into at least mediocrity when they probably didn't even deserve that. And I'd say one of the saddest things I've seen is when his own wife and their kids can't go to the first game of the season because they're going to get booed. I mean, sports fandom has really gone too far when something like that happens. Bothers me.
Well, Dan Campbell, you lose the playoff game and somebody leaks his address and you got,
Yeah.
I mean, they should be planting flowers at Dan Campbell's house.
Yeah. He's fabulous. And that whole franchise, last year in training camp, I remember I've been to the Lions over the years in training camp, and there's 16 people there, as a crowd. And last year it was raining steadily at 7:30 in the morning for an 8:30 practice, and there was a line of people waiting to get in, a long line. I mean, they've changed football in Detroit. Bill Parcells always said the one team that he thought would have been great to coach, not that he looked back and wanted to change his life, would be the Detroit Lions. He just had a fascination because when Parcells was a kid, the Lions meant something.
Yeah. And Tony Dungy said he came close to coaching the Lions because his dad was a Lions fan.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, your remembrances of Pete Rose when you were in Cincinnati, do you have a favorite story?
I'm 23 years old. I just get hired by the Cincinnati Enquirer. The Philadelphia Phillies come to town, and my sports editor says, go basically do the state of Pete Rose. What's going on with him now with the Phillies, all that. And I just walked into the clubhouse before a game, 4:30 in the afternoon in Cincinnati. And I introduced myself, and he goes, Peter King. Hey, you're new at the Enquirer. That's cool. Love the Enquirer. Great paper. Where are you from? Enfield, Connecticut. Oh, cool. How'd you end up out here? Well, I went to Ohio University. Oh, cool. He interviewed me for 2 minutes before I started talking to him. And Dan, over the years, I would see him occasionally. I went to lunch with him one day in New York when he was still managing the Reds, just for fun, because I like the guy. And then the last time I saw him was maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was out at Fox on the Fox lot in L.A., and I saw him, and he goes, Peter, how you doing? What are you doing here? And he had the memory of an elephant. He really did. And he could talk to anybody pretty much about anything as long as it had to do with sports.
Yeah. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to Johnny Bench yesterday.
Yeah, I got to hear that. I got to go back and listen.
Yeah. It was raw. Are you sticking around for the pizza party after the show?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's great to be with you.
That's Peter King, the Let's Go podcast. Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Max Crosby, and Jim Gray. Monday at 6 Eastern on Mad Dog Radio. That's channel 82. We'll come back. Last call for phone calls. What we learn, what's in store tomorrow, this day in sports history, right after this.